necessary, go ahead. You're good. Thank you, Kate. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the December Bike Ped Trails Commission. I think we have everybody tonight except Ali and Michael. And Alex is on zooming in. Let's get started. The first two things just administratively, let's just clear the minutes from the last two meetings. So we'll do this separately. Is there a motion to approve the October 7th meeting minutes? David just made a motion, I think. Sure. Is there a second? Ted seconded. Any discussion on those? All in favor of approving those minutes, raise your hand. All right. I think that's approved. And the same for December 4th minutes. Anybody want to make a motion to approve those? Ted, you just made a motion, right? And Andy seconded it. Any discussion on those minutes? Everybody okay with that? All in favor of approving the November 4th minutes? Show of hands, please. Thank you. Okay. Let's get into the meat of this, which I think will be the last real meeting we tackle the map project. The schedule is that I think Kevin Huntley, if I'm wrong, that we will discuss any additional comments we want to pass along to FHU. We'll get those to you in the next couple of days. You're planning at some point mid-late January to bring the final to the trustees. Is that right?
Yeah, right now that's scheduled for the second meeting in January.
And we would, I assume, have a chance to look at that before or when it goes to, so that we can be at the meeting and form any opinions we want with the final report, right?
Sure, we'll send it to you guys as soon. We'll send it to everybody as soon as we get it, because it'll be a lot to digest.
Yes, yeah. Okay.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
Do we have time for Chris to give us a trustee update?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to put that on the agenda, but of course. Now Chris is caught flat-footed. He's got.
Yeah. See if I can remember what I feel like Thanksgiving was kind of a mind wipe. We had a discussion with the art space folks about the properties across the way. Sort of fits into our discussion of capital improvement plan, which involves a lot of bike ped trails stuff. There is stuff provisionally in the budget for next year, at least for planning and right of way acquisition, et cetera. And then further projects budgeted at least as maybe not specific projects entirely, but a placeholder at least, I would say. I don't know. Do you agree with that? And then, yeah, the project across the way, we sort of have bad news involving the grants from the CHAFA and the low income housing tax credit program, which seems to make the rental side of the project harder to. We need to find other grants first, I guess, apparently, before we can win the ones from that LIHTC program, I guess. So we're trying to continue. ArtSpace, I think, is continuing to work on that, but we're also putting more effort into the other half of the program, which is I think we're aiming it to be more of a for sale component that would be on the east side of the promenade or south and east side of the south, other parts of the parcel that have not been previously planned out for these rental units, essentially. So that's going to go back in the in January. I assume we'll have an update. I'm not sure about that, but we basically, that project kind of, we want to get that going, obviously, for affordable housing reasons, but it's definitely a funding conundrum for us. So what else we talked about? Downtowners coming back for next year. I think it's still sort of in pilot mode. We have kind of a funding share with RAFTA that we're okay with, but it may not last forever. So we'll see about that. And I think we want more data about it.
Does that mean, Chris, that the user data was pretty pretty good for bringing it back?
I don't know that I was a little I felt like we could have had more of a discussion about it. We're gonna have more of a discussion. We'll have more of a digest on data in the spring, but I think there was a lot of feeling that the winter time is gonna be key months for the
Mhm.
pilot to actually be useful for a lot of people. Cause it does become a lot harder to bike and stuff around town. So, I think that's kind of the thought there. And so, yeah, what else?
And when does that run through?
I think it'll run through next year.
It's a full year.
Yeah,
of
it'll be
funding.
full year, yeah.
The only thing I was gonna add is, one thing that Chris isn't even aware of yet, but I did get some pretty loud and clear direction from the board at our discussion of the CIP that they really wanted to do what we could to try to get at least one of those crossings on 133 constructed next year. So while I still think it's aggressive, we are going to diligently try to do that so the budget will reflect construction probably of the Nice Atlantic crossing during next year, and then the one up toward Ross Montessori the following year, because that's going to be a little more challenging. But we're actually having a preliminary meeting with CDOT on the Nice Atlantic crossing next Wednesday.
Great.
Do we know what kind of crossing?
It'll be similar to the kind of like the one we did at Cowan, but the concept for this one, I think, is gonna drift more toward the Durango one, where it's kind of it's not a straight across crossing, it's an angled crossing in the center of the road.
Hey, Kevin, are those discussions with CDOT bringing up other things that the town might want to do on 133? Or is it just been an isolated conversation about crossings?
It's been an isolated conversation about the Nice Atlantic crossing up to this point to try to get that to a point where we could bid it and actually get contractors to give us bids sometime next year that aren't completely over the top.
Can I make one comment also?
Yeah, sure. Make sure your red light's on. Ted.
Yeah, it is. That maybe you can comment on the meeting immediately after our bike ped meeting, the trustees meeting. The thing that struck me in particular, because there was a lot of discussion at that meeting about where we were going with the road projects and how we were going to pay for it. And Colin Laird brought up, he thought he made the recommendation. I don't know if you can comment on if it was discussed any further since that meeting about bringing in a financial consultant to really talk about how the town might do a lot of the fundraising that was talked about being needed for a lot of these different projects that we have going on between the pool and the park and the roads and all that stuff. I mean, he was looking at it very holistically, and I didn't know if, I was curious if any further discussion at other subsequent meetings has talked about doing that. I think he mentioned maybe doing it in February or something.
So I'm gonna cop out on this one because I left for 2 weeks right after that meeting and I just got
Oh,
back.
you missed it.
So
Oh,
I don't
You're
know
not sure.
internal
I
discussion.
believe it is on an agenda provisionally for sometime in February.
Yeah.
And it does sort of line up with the art space thing. So I think we're hoping, I don't know, we'll see I'm not sure what Lauren has in store or whatever, but I think we're hoping it's a discussion, of sort of what are the main municipal financing tracks that are sort of governmentally oriented. And then maybe also a little bit of discussion of like, what are the public-private partnership possibilities as well? And what are the models that exist in that realm as well?
I was glad to hear him bring that up and
Yeah.
see that.
I just, I've said this before, I'll say it again, since we're budgeting for things for
for Kevin, for your benefit, and Chris to carry to the board. I think it's the opinion of the commission, the Bike Ped Commission. I think it's something we've expressed, and I think you'll see it expressed in our comments tonight that we really believe in a holistic approach to 133, that I don't want to slow down a project that's needed and wanted and would help. But at the same time, I want to anticipate what other things we might want to do and bring those all to CDOT so we don't run out of, CDOT says, oh, I wish you told me that when you asked for this Atlantic that you also wanted X, Y, and Z. I think it's potentially a real mistake to just go after one thing with CDOT and not lay out all the things we might want. And so I put that out there. I think we'll express that tonight, but also I think that message should be carried, should be thought of all the time, and certainly should be part of what the board considers when budgeting and starting projects on 133 or anywhere for that matter. But okay, Nikki, I saw you walk in. Did you? I may call on you when we get to the complete streets portion. So we're here to make final recommendations on the last draft we've seen of MAP. After giving us a lot of thought and after putting out the agenda a week ago or so, where I said prioritize action items, implementation strategy, review capital projects, and report on any omissions from one of the things we want. I think really what it comes down to is, and this again is something that we have a group have been talking about for a while, which is connecting the guiding principles with specific goals and specific strategies and implementation steps. And I do think that we've been asking for that link for a while in this report. FHU has put a few goals into their report under the guiding principles, a couple for each guiding principle. And they've given us a long list of action items, which I think many of them are ones we agree with, and many of them are on the list that we've generated over the last year or so. I think what I'd like to propose to you guys and have a discussion around is that all of that can sort of be brought together with the addition of a section in the report that takes the objectives that are either already in the report or that we might add, connects those with the action items that many of which are already in the report, some of which we might add. And so link those so we know exactly what steps we're doing and what objective we're trying to meet, and then overlay to the extent we need it or extent we can do it at this stage, some implementation steps for those. So we'll get into that a little bit. I leaned on a document we used that I think we all prepared and we used in an earlier meeting, which was a document where we called objectives and strategies. Guys, I remember we kind of broke up into work groups and worked on that. I emailed it all to you earlier today for discussion purposes. One of the recommendations that is in that list is to, and again, this was something that FHU also recommended in their action items, was that we develop and adopt a complete streets plan for the town. And just wanted to spend a few minutes clarifying what that is. I think as part of that, not only adopting a plan, but writing and proposing that the town adopt complete streets legislation that would help sort of guide, solidify, mandate, and make sure it happens. So, and in the attachment tonight, the complete streets plan, there's been some confusion around what it is really. And it's a 10-step process or that you follow, 10 steps in a complete street plan that you follow. It's different for every community. There's not like, take this off the shelf and apply it to your city. It's what you want as a community, what your objectives are, what your vision is for your community. And then it gives you steps to make sure that you're including everybody, that there's proper design guidance, that there's proper buy-in from the community, from the town, management, to create it. And there's a clear plan for implementation that I think every time I've read this, they say that's key, right? Because that sets timetables, sets accountability, it sets dates. So it holds you to schedule. So I just want to, put that out there so that when we get to talk about it in a few minutes, we're sort of on the same page as what it is. In this attachment, there is AARP has, and thanks to H-Friendly Carbondale, they supply this to us. They have a whole document you can see about creating a complete streets plan. Section 2 in that document deals with creating a complete streets legislation. And I think this is a format, again, I think the steps are, we would like to see it in the plan. If FSU puts in the plan and the trustees adopt it, we would then circle back and present legislation to be considered. And it's really laid out in section 2 of that document. And I don't think we need to go through it unless anybody has any specific questions. Nikki, did you want to say anything about this that I haven't already said, or about adopting legislation, or about adopting complete streets that you or H-Friendly feels strongly about?
No, I'm here to answer questions that people had about how to put together this information and what resources we have at the Public Policy Institute to help us do that.
Okay.
So if anybody wants me, I'm here.
All right, great. Anybody else have questions about that at this point?
So it looked like the parts in those sections that specifically related to municipalities, the verbiage is in bold type, that all we need to do is cut and paste that entire thing. I mean, to create and just to insert wherever it says name of the municipality, insert Carbondale into that doc, and that would be our document.
Mhm.
I mean, they've written it for us. I mean, we don't have to reinvent anything.
Yeah, I think
And
they've
all we
written,
need to do is cut and paste it.
they've given us a real good guidance on
Yeah.
legislation.
Yeah.
I think we've got to distinguish the legislation from the actual policies and the plan. And I don't think you need the legislation to have the town be a complete streets town and accept a policy. But I think it goes a long way to solidifying the commitment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it necessarily would be a difficult thing to draft it and present it to the trustees for review.
Yeah.
Chris, you had a question?
No, I think that might be a good way to get some of the ideas if you felt like there was more holistic things that weren't making it into the nitty gritty of this plan, but you still felt like those weren't seeing the outlet. This might be a good forum for it.
Yeah, I think so. Although I don't think the legislation necessarily has a place for, it states why we want to adopt a plan, why we think it's important for legislation to be in place. It doesn't really get into the specifics of what that plan's going to be.
But I do think, the board for sure has done resolutions, whether it's the environmental bill of rights or various things like that, where it's a guiding document that's supposed to be sort of then set hopefully in the working memory of the trustees to think about that kind of thing. And always, so that I think that's kind of the key in terms of just making things work in the long run, is that people remember them and apply them in the moment when it's time to assess a project.
Yeah, Right, so there's some
Or we see an
institutional
opportunity.
memory and
Yeah.
history that helps, that legislation helps with, right?
I wasn't quite, I
I
mean,
have a different opinion.
Hold on a second. What is it?
All I was gonna say is that I think, kind of tagging on to what Chris said, I think the legislation would be worthwhile to use when the plan is adopted.
Which plan is adopted?
The complete streets policy or whatever is gonna be
Right.
developed. When that goes to the board, then you can use the legislation for them to formally recognize it, kind of like Chris said.
Which would be great. I just want to make sure that the trustees want one before we do it, right? Yes, but I think the timing would make sense to me. Yeah. What is it, Andy?
I said 2 points. First, it felt like some of the language in here, in the complete streets document that's attached is actually like a little bit weaker than I think a lot of folks, than like the opinions of a lot of folks on this commission and on the board in town. Like it talks about sort of like equal access to all sorts of modes of transportation, which like I think so the map plan at least talks about, at least in some places, prioritizing like bike and ped and other things over cars. So I think that's just one thing to be aware of. And then the second is, I guess, more of a question is, I don't think I fully understand like what would change or like what the goal of like of actually adopting this as legislation. Like, is it mainly just like what you were saying, Chris, as like a reminder to the board that like to keep this in mind when making decisions? Like, what or how would this be incorporated into any sort of transportation planning, I guess?
Yeah, I'll answer that. But first of all, in your first point, I think that certainly we would draft this in such a way that conformed with our vision, our guiding principles. And you guys want to address his second part of his question? It sounds like you were raising your hand for that, Kevin.
Yeah, so repeat the second part of your question, if you would.
And it's basically like, if we did adopt something like this, like what would that actually mean? How would that change anything, I guess?
So what it really means is, from an implementation perspective, particularly with private development, we if it's adopted legislatively, we can go, you need to follow this plan. Show us how what you're proposing matches up with our complete streets policy. Outside of that, we can ask, we can negotiate, but it puts it in a more strong position to be used as a review document, whether it's Bike Ped Commission, Planning and Zoning, the Board of Trustees can look at that and go, we can even make applicants describe how their plan follows our complete streets policy. Does that help?
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe it just is a question of how it's actually written, but like, if we did copy and paste basically what's in here, it seems pretty generally vague to me. Yeah, I'm not sure, like, I think it would be hard to argue that any development does not follow this, that it's like almost in town, like it's almost broad enough that like everything we already have sort of fits in this. But I don't know, maybe that's just a question of.
Chris, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we can, I don't know how much you can control what the council decides to build and at what pace and how much staff can just handle at what pace. I mean, I think everybody is sort of on the same page that we would like to get to this situation where we have a network of bikeways that people can get from anywhere in town, and we have sidewalks that are connected, and we have safe crossings of 133, but we just can't do it all at once. So I think the map plan hopefully is the roadmap that's supposed to be the half of the plan that's supposed to keep the council on track in terms of like, we have this huge laundry list and let's keep our eye on the ball of like, really, we don't get there until we finish most of it. And then, but then we also have this legislative part of it potentially that's setting out a vision and saying, hey, this is like something the council believes in, and we want this to be known that this is like the approach to streets and movement and, you know, accessibility that the town wants, and also developers should follow it and honor it or whatever.
Yeah, I think for me, it becomes, it solidifies the commitment, right? As the years go by and trustees change, we come back to this document that really states very clearly what and why we became a complete streets town, and it's able to hold people to the content of that rather than just, oh, we got another plan. No, we have a legislation document that says you need to take all these things into consideration.
But I think it's this commission's job for sure as well to keep an eye on the long run of like, what are the projects on the list? And this commission, I think, should keep an eye on them and continually communicate with the trustees about like, yeah, what are the next steps out there, most logical ones, and maybe that changes a little bit, because it's a long list of items, so it's not inconceivable that something jumps up and
Right.
down the list based on some change in
Yeah.
traffic or something.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Well, I did just want to call out, and Chris, to that point, the ARP document does include, I think it's like section 6 or 7, an advisory board it recommends including as part of the legislation to advise, I think, trustees and potentially the mayor.
Mhm.
Would that just be this board, or should
Probably.
it include some external partners to be more representative of all users?
My instinct would be to just use this board to eliminate administrative overness.
But yeah, fair enough. My thought just being knowing that there's restrictions on what this commission can and cannot do from a meeting standpoint, thinking if there's a separate advisory board on something like this. But
I also think age friendly is a good sort of group outside parallel group as well to lean on. And they've obviously brought this to us anyway. So I think,
That's a good question about executing all this stuff, and I'm sure we'll get into that, but let's focus for the time being right now on just the recommendation we want to make in that content. I sent an email to you guys. I don't know if you guys all got it in terms of looking back at that last document. You guys, okay. So let me just sort of walk you through what we did here. We took the objective, and this again is most of the stuff you guys have seen. We took each one of the guiding principles that is in the document. The first thing you'll see under the definition of the guiding principle is objectives that were put in by FHU. So under the first one, we describe what it means to be safe. FHU added calm traffic throughout town and eliminate traffic-related injuries and fatalities. I think we also had those. The first one on our list under safe is traffic calming plan for throughout town. We then took that a little further and added some ideas as to how we would strategies to actually get that done. And under this, we had some ideas that we generated. We also pulled up from FHU's list of action items, those action items in their document that we thought were applicable to this objective. For example, the pilot programs for Hendrick and 8th Street would be a strategy for creating a traffic calming plan through town. The action item that FHU had for neighborhood speed management, similar to Littleton's neighborhood traffic calming. So a lot of these things that are now listed here under, we have guiding principle, we have objectives that are numbered, and then if we have further strategies for those objectives, they're lettered in this document. And there is some duplication under different categories, which we could clean up. But I guess the first question for the trustees, I think what we're trying to do here is in one section, pull like I said, pull the guiding principle with clear objectives and strategy for hitting those objectives. And then, strategy starts to bleed into implementation. But, then we have to get into how we're actually going to get that done. Does anybody have any comments, thoughts, questions just about this as a direction that the Bike Ped would like to take in making our final recommendations?
I have a question about priority. Like, do we have to decide, is it safety? And that's where this project that we all agree, we need to do something about this intersection. Does that become priority number one, or is it more of a budgetary decision? We can do 10 of these items for very little bit of money and have it done by the end of winter. Or is it the involvement with CDOT? Like, I think we all want all these things happening, but how do we prioritize them?
That's a good question. It's a long list.
Yeah, it's a
Yes.
long list,
Rick,
a very broad list.
did she tee you up? No?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can comment. Yeah, I mean, my personal feeling is that we would need to develop an implementation strategy and in phases. So what do we want to do first? And we might have a list of 10 items on that list, and we might also need to clarify what the first, is there a time limit on first phase? I mean, my feeling is we just have certain items that need to be done first because strategically it needs to lead to other things that may happen down the road. But, I just as an exercise, I drafted up a potential list of first priorities. So that is part of what we're considering at this point. And I don't know how much detail we want to get into, but the first thing on my list was Highway 133, and we needed to do, there was some subsets under Highway 133. The second thing was safe school access for children. If there's anything on that list of actions that are proposed in FHU's action list that really would improve safety for kids going to school, that might be our second priority. I kind of view personally 133 as being a huge safety issue for the entire community, so that it's all encompassing. But anyway, does that answer your question? I see a strategy with priorities that then relate to actions that we can do that are already on the list.
It does answer it, but it also brings back, again, 133 in my mind is the only issue we have in this town that involves CDOT. Therefore, longer process, more protocols. So the likelihood of getting that done first, which I believe to be a huge safety issue and should be a priority, may be the thing that's the most costly and will take the longest. So then what do we do
Well,
with that?
I think it's okay to work on multiple of these first phase priorities concurrently.
Yeah.
Some are going to take longer, some are easy. I mean,
Yeah, and that would be great
it's
to
but it's
agree and know
complicated.
that we're going to do that. I think that's a great point. Like, let's agree that's going to have to happen. We can paint something on the ground and put a flower pot at the same time we're applying to CDOT to get a big cross section or something.
Yes, and as we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, things are already happening with CDOT, right? So it's not too late to jump in and start providing our thoughts on that.
I should say that I'm not proposing we do the same thing, but Durango has a whole list of points for different things, and you total up the points, and if it has a higher point rating than another, then it might be higher on the list. I mean, I don't think we're going that way, but yeah, I'm sure there'll be a discussion on how these things, come together. I don't want to derail this, but
Go ahead.
I don't want to change the subject unless.
No, I think we've
Okay.
tackled priorities. The only last
Okay.
thing I'd say on priorities is I'm not sure we're looking to FHU to set those priorities, but I think those have to be set
Right.
by the community and by us. Yeah.
The report has that in it though, like there's the list and it has like 0 to 5 years and stuff, which like sort of is a priority.
What
list.
the
The
way,
map. report. So it seems like if we don't want FHU to set that, isn't that a part of a report that we need to ask them to edit?
What, because we're in their action items, they set timeframes?
Yeah. I guess how is that meant to be interpreted if that's not a priority?
Well, it's a
list?
start.
Yeah, it's a start. It's a, you know, it's a recommendation by FHU, like a lot of them. It's something we could consider when we're looking at priorities.
Okay, I
Right.
guess my thought is like, once the plan gets approved, or if it gets approved, I want to make sure that we like keep that in mind and not just like, okay, now we have this plan and the board gets it and they like, or like staff gets it and they start like seeing that as a priority list.
Yeah.
Right, I don't know, that just seems like the natural thing that it seems like is likely to happen unless we do something.
You're gonna make sure.
Unless
get an
we
editable
agree on
version of
that
this
list, I
document.
can't remember. It might be similar to what our feelings are. Like maybe we should make a note to review that, but maybe we agree with what's there and then it's not a problem.
And even if you were to say, let's do this list, guess what? They have 25 items that have the same priority.
Right.
You know, 0 to 5 years, so you're still gonna have to break it down,
Still got to break that down too.
so. that's
Can I make a
standard guide.
comment? That one of the things that you later on mention in your 6 pages here is related to safe routes to school.
Yeah.
And I did some reading about safe routes to school, and that the focus of that particular program being so strongly focused on safety and health, as well as environment, in terms of guiding principles related specifically to kids. Almost everything along all of these corridors, and specifically 133, can be easily related to safe routes to school and justified in that respect. And from the way I read the Colorado Safe Routes to School, which was just updated this year, I think in May, they revised their 5-year strategic plan for safe routes to school. There has been lots and lots of money being dumped into communities in the name of fixing roadways for the sake of safety and health benefits for kids benefit, which will inevitably affect the entire community, not just kids that are using it to get to school. And potentially, if we look closely at that, I see the complete streets as a philosophical guideline, but the safe routes to school emphasis and justification for everything that you want to do cranks up your potential for getting the funding, and the states have got the money the state has the money to dole out. And I think there was 15-year period between 2005 and 2015. There were 500 applications, but 300 of those applications got $36 million in communities all over the state, just related to safe schools, because you include that as your focus of what your intent is to create safe routes for the kids to go to school. And it's changed, and the funding has dwindled a little bit. It's come down now to where they say the state currently says they have $2.5 million a year to give to communities for safe routes to schools, but it still is a high priority, I think, as far as helping to get funding to get these things to happen. And all I have to do is, the other interesting thing was I came across a community of Berthold, Colorado, and they're just a little bit larger than us. And they have an area of their town that they wanted to do improvements on, similar to what we're talking about doing with 133. And they broke down that one strip, into a 65-page document that gave them their priorities, the reasons, the rationale, and it was broken down by the way they described each section. This section is a commercial section. This section is an industrial section. This is a residential area. And using the guiding principles specific for each of those characteristics of that strip, of that one road. It's only a 2-mile strip. So it's very similar to what we want to do with 133, but they spelled it out very, very clearly, that whole one route. And so they know what their plan is at any one stage. And they know what it's going to cost, and they know what their time
Right.
frame is.
Well, a couple of thoughts just turned to me. Yes, I think taking an approach like that was a project like 133 would be a good idea. So we're looking at everything and considering everything. I think, something like Safe Routes to Schools, which touches on so many of the guiding principles, might also help us prioritize things.
Exactly.
The more things they touch on, the higher priority it should get. And I do think that, as you pointed out, and as I've read, having some of these things embedded in a complete streets plan will help with funding. Right, because a lot of these agencies, Federal Highway Commission, for example, looks to a complete streets policy as sort of a baseline.
Well, the next 4 years, we can't count on federal funding at all. And apparently a lot of the federal funding has gone away up until about 2020. But now they're relatively small, but the state is really behind it.
Right.
And
So the state.
Yeah.
Okay. If you haven't forgotten your thought, David.
I have. I feel like we're kind of getting into details that are all interesting, but maybe not along the lines of what we're trying to do
What should we be
tonight.
doing here?
So, and I totally agree. I want to nominate you to head up our subcommittee for Safe Routes to School, because I think it is absolutely true that you start putting together Safe Routes to School priorities, guess what? They really will come right back into what we're trying to do anyway. Anyway, just back to what you had printed
Yes.
up. The question I had was, I think the map is basically fine to work with. I mean, it's organized in a particular way. It takes a little while to kind of figure out. And I know we definitely need to look at some higher level issues so that this all kind of boils down. I'm assuming we're talking formatting, like this has many of these same ideas with a few additions put into a different format, correct?
I think to some extent, I think there's a
Okay.
lot of things in here that weren't identified as objectives.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
right. So there's some really cool additions in this. I was like, oh man, that's
Okay.
cool, I like this. But what are we trying to do? I mean, I like all of these things. Some are not here. I don't mind what's here. If you go through the action items, it's like, oh man, we should do that. Oh, we should do that. Oh my, absolutely. It's like, they're all good ideas as well as these slightly different formatting. And the question is, what are we?
Okay.
What are we
Well,
trying to do?
what I'm talking about is having this commission propose to FHU that a section that looks like this, the document you're holding in your hand, be included into the report. And you can call it formatting if you like. I think drawing a very clear connection to action items, strategies, and objectives is important. I think right now the report is really light on objectives. And I think we should see, I would like to see more objectives in the report.
So this would be in addition to the project list and action items, like in addition?
Well, I think a lot of leave the project list aside for a minute, because we're not talking about that. We will, but we're not. The action items, I'm not sure how many I pulled up, maybe half of them I've pulled up into this section. So to that extent, it's just formatting, putting them, tying them directly visually to a guiding principle and a specific objective. The more important thing is, I think we're making a clear statement of objectives. Okay, I think a clear statement of objectives that we should try to achieve with this plan. to that extent, you could put the action items anywhere you want. I think the objectives are important to have in the plan and for everybody to understand that those are the objectives of the plan, right? For example, we're not just trying to put a crossing on 133 in Atlantic. We're trying to slow traffic, create more crossings, and make the existing crossings safer. That's an objective, okay? That's where I'm, and I don't know how many are here. There are probably 30 objectives that are in the document I emailed out this afternoon, and there were only, 14 in FHU's document.
Are we also talking about including implementation? Like who's responsible for that, which would help us have set priorities?
I would like to, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're going to get to that. David, does that answer your question?
Yeah, because, the bottom line is there's going to be a document. And the main question is this an addition to the document? And from these other pieces will be modified, so it's not duplicated or?
Yeah, listen, I think there's some action items in FHU's report that I would like to see reformatted into this format, okay? At the very least, I would like to see the objectives included in the report. So when we pick up the report, we know what we're trying to accomplish, what the objectives are, and the action items should follow from those objectives. Okay, we can put them right in here or we can put them down below. I don't really care. And then we do have to get to implementation at some point. Okay. Alex, what do you got?
I mean, I was just reading through the document that you had earlier today, and I think the clearest thing that I see between that and what the report has previously given us, and I always try to come back to this, I think we've had this conversation multiple times, is when I look at the objective that you wrote and then the following action items underneath, I feel like there's something measurable there. And that's still my biggest disconnect with the entire FHU proposal, is that they've stated some guiding principles up front that you could call objectives, but I still don't see how do you measure, did we meet this? Like objective 1, the way you've written it here, I look at that as, okay, if we calm traffic, we reduce speed, that feels like we can measure that. If we reduce fatalities, we can measure that. And reading through the Complete Streets program from ARP, they touch on the same thing, that as part of a Complete Streets policy, there has to be an annual report and performance benchmarks. And I still think that we lack that from what FHU has given us. So I mentioned it earlier today, but I think that should be tied as part of like a measurement plan to these strategies by objective, to make it whole.
Yeah, let me be clear. I mean, there's I think what you're saying is that objectives guide you to something measurable. Is that right?
Yeah, you can't have an objective unless it's measurable.
Right.
Unless, because then you don't know if you met that objective.
Right.
Or not.
So I think that fits in. That's a great point. Thank you, Alex, for formatting aside to beef up the objective section of this document. Okay. Yeah. That's I think that all that helps flush out, I think, what we're trying to do.
So do you want to send this 6 pages that you wrote?
Yeah, I think, it needs to be cleaned up a little bit to, there's some duplication in here, because, we were sort of just listing things, and some of the things that we had listed when we'd done this had also been covered by FHU's strategies, action items that we pulled up. So, it needs to be a little cleaned up, but yeah, I think this is for the most part things that we as a group have put on paper and kind of thought were important as objectives, right? So yes, I would propose that we send this to Kevin, to FHU through Kevin, and request that these issues be addressed in the document. And I think that either, as the conversation we've just had, we can, the important thing is I think the objectives get in, which can then help us set priorities and implementation. I think that as to the action items, I love seeing them right here, but we can leave them in the existing table if FHU thinks that's best. But I guess I'd make the request that, yeah, we have these objectives and these actions items included somewhere in the document.
Gap is closing. Do we have enough time before they finish their final report, their final version, to get this to them to make that?
Well, I
those
think
changes happen?
I think the timeframe allows for that, for us to submit final comments.
This needs to be cleaned up, which before sending it.
Yes.
I agree with. Is there a way that we can have like an actual plan for cleaning up and for us all to see a clean version? Because at least the way I like putting myself in FHU's shoes, I think I would get this document and I'd be like, I don't understand what you want me to change. Like a lot of the stuff is in the report. Some of it is stuff that's just taken word for word.
Well, yeah, a lot of it is their wording. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like I don't yet have even like listening to you describe this and like, it's hard to understand, I think, what exactly we're asking them to change.
Well, I think this conversation's been helpful. I think what we're trying, I think the number one request is that we beef up the objective section of the report. Okay. And in this document, the things that are, I think we actually did this maybe before we started calling objectives guiding principles, but the objectives are actually our guiding principles. Everything under here that's got a number is a potential objective that we would offer up to FHU.
So do you mean add those as?
I'm sorry?
Do you mean add those as like expanding the list of guiding principles?
Expanding the list of objectives that for a large part, these things, traffic calming, increased safety on Highway 133,
Increase, well, we're missing. a
clear
number.
policies around electric vehicles. A lot of these things are objectives, a list of objectives that we came up with that are not currently at the report. This is the way I see it. So we would want them included.
Could we simply highlight, highlight the things that we're adding? So it's still kind of a cohesive document, but something really simple, like highlighting things that we know are not included already. Also, there's, I think, a number 3 missing, but.
You're envisioning it in this section?
I think the action items are I wouldn't call them objectives, right? Those are more strategies for meeting objectives that are not well outlined. Okay, so I think 2 things. I think to the extent we add objectives, we would need to add strategies to meet those objectives, or action items to meet those objectives.
Okay, I guess I agree with Andy that if I'm putting myself in the shoes of them, I think it's important to try to speak the language of this document as much as possible and figure out how to compromise between these 2 things. Because if you do just send them this thing, I think it's going to be too confusing, or it's too much information all at once for them to digest. And I think they're going to want hopefully a distilled set of actionable things that they can change. That's not going to be a whole, they don't have to reconsider the whole. That's what's going to cost us a lot of money, is if we send them back to the drawing board again with an idea to go rethink the entire thing.
Well,
And we haven't had much success trying to get them to reimagine it.
yes, so,
anyways.
yes, I think that's true. And I'm not at all, don't, I assume they would be overwhelmed by almost anything we send them.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, please.
The thing that I think is missing for me is a way to link what we're proposing here to what already exists. We have projects and we have action items. And if we had a higher level of objectives, then we could link to meet this objective, we have these project items and we have these action items that are already in there. And so maybe if we could ask FHU to create some sort of index system within the action items in the project list, and we could stick with higher level objectives and say, here's some objectives. These can be met by, item 1C on the list and item 2D on the action item list. Does that make sense? So there's a link.
Yeah, listen, and Kevin, maybe you want to weigh in here. I think what we're discovering is the most important thing on this list that's in front of us is a need to create a more complete list of objectives that MAP is trying to accomplish. And sticking with the existing formatting, they have a whole matrix of action items. Leaving those things in there, maybe beefing it up to the extent that some new objectives have been added that might need some action items. And maybe working off something that Rick suggested, so there's some kind of system that connects those action items to the objectives. I'm fine either way. I think the most important thing from our perspective is that we beef up the list of objectives so we have a better sense of what we're trying to accomplish overall with the report. And as Alex pointed out, we have some real measurable guidance to go after.
Kevin, is it cool if I just make one more comment here?
Yeah.
So at the latest draft in the matrix of projects that they included, they did include like this ties back to safety. This ties back to, I think it's, like they gave a relevant guiding principles column in the project list. However, it doesn't show how. Like, install curb bulb outs. Yes, we all know it's probably going to make things a little bit safer, but like, that's where I'm just like, none of the objectives or guiding principles section of the current report give us any showcase of how. So for me, I look at it as the like, how do these things accomplish these guiding principles? Into, I think, yes, we can kind of clean up this list, but at the end of the day, underneath these guiding principles, we have to have, it's like having the objective, having the key results that we want to measure, and then that leads us into the project list, the action items, the tasks to complete to get there. So I like, that's where I look at the list that we've provided here, and I would say like clean it up, but I would not personally accept a final report that doesn't include a beefier guiding principles or objective section from FHU, because that should be part of what they do. If they don't, it's literally just a project list that seems more like maintenance or a facelift for the town.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. Kevin, you were about to answer, I think, the question about FSU digesting or trying to think about how to incorporate our comments.
Well, let's think of this like a cow eating, and I'll regurgitate into my second stomach and see if I'm picking up what you're putting down, and then maybe
Okay.
we can get it to them.
That sounds disgusting.
Well, that's what they do.
Okay, so I just had a thought and a vision. So it is kind of true. We don't have a whole lot of generalities to kind of march us along, or stepping stones. And there's not a lot of talk about having things be measurable. So can we add something that's along the lines of this but make sure that it's nothing specific, like it's not a specific project, because, you know, we already have projects and this and that, but have it be like, a lot of these things really are, you know, measure speeds in traffic, conduct surveys of residents. I mean, it's just kind of not as specific as projects, but it's giving you kind of the stepping stones to meet that objective without getting into the details of, well, what's the project? What's the crossing? Like some of the things you talk about in 133, it's not specific. It's saying, you know, let's look at it as a whole. Let's start measuring traffic speeds. So maybe it would be an addition that just is everything above the details.
Yeah, it's a section of objectives above the action items in the project list.
Right, and
Right.
rather than, and once again, I read through it all, but I was like, well, how much have we pulled? And maybe that's the thing that would be confusing for them, is that it's like, wow, you know, this actually is already
It's already in
put
there
here.
somewhere. Right.
And just to say, really, we're not gonna pull what they have unless there's a reason. I mean, they do have some general things, but have this be kind of like the high level. In other words, this makes sense. And then you can start to look at this and say, okay, this is kind of breaking it down a little bit more detailed. And also making sure that, I mean, I agree with Alex. I mean, all this stuff, hopefully we're always considering, are we measuring these things? And are we going to be able to say later, you know, did we accomplish something? You know, is it better?
And I think that's what I was trying to say, and you said it better. I think
Yeah.
they keep the objectives at a higher level that link to an action item, which makes me think also we shouldn't conflate our action items and our objectives. We should tell Matthew, these are action items we think are missing specifically, instead of just this is kind of a jumble, you know what I'm saying? So here's action items that are missing, we think you should add. And here's objectives we think they're missing, we think you should add, and not conflate the two. You know,
Yeah,
and I think that's what you're
Yeah, I think
saying.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
What I think is important, you made an important distinction there between like specific items that maybe belong in an implementation section or something versus more definition to these strategies, right? There's sort of two places. Some of them are like under, like one could fill in more detail underneath these guiding principle things, like there are these calm traffic throughout Carbondale, which is, you know, traffic, that's your number one thing here.
Right.
So some of those things might fit in here, but maybe something that's like a safe routes to schools thing or something has been touched on, but maybe needs to be fleshed out a little bit more in that implementation section. But I think really trying to redline this map, this thing, more than send them something totally unconnected to it. Like if we can figure out where these things fit into this thing and how to reshape this as much as possible, because I think it's going to bounce off this thing if it doesn't come in a digestible.
Yeah, I appreciate all that. I think we're all talking to the same point, right? We need to figure out how to get a better set of objectives into this document and tie action items to those objectives, right? And add any action items we think might be missing based on the objectives we have, right? And do it in a way that is recognizable to the existing document. Kevin, did we already answer the cow regurgitation? Did we already go through that process?
Kind of. I agree with the suggestion of this is what we think is missing from the objectives. This is what we think is missing from the action items. I think that will make it a lot easier for them. And I think you have it here. It's just.
Yeah, it's just a matter of breaking it out.
Right.
Organizing it, yeah.
And I also agree with adding the measurements in at maybe two different places. Maybe you discuss under each one of these how, because you're going to have overlap in some of these things. So discussing tools that can be used to measure each objective. And then maybe what we can do is figure out how to create some icons in that action item section instead of adding words to that. Add a how do you measure this action item as well as measuring the objective? Because measuring speed, I'll just take traffic calming as an example. If your objective is to calm traffic, you measure speed before you do something, then you do it, and then you measure it afterwards to see if it slowed traffic down.
Mhm.
That's how you would know if you met that objective. But it also could be how you would know if your action item met that objective as well.
Right, understood.
So I think we could have measurements in both places, but maybe one in a more graphic format and maybe under the, where Chris was talking about the objectives sections, we add verbiage that says, how do you measure some of these things?
Okay.
I have a question. How did we measure 8th Street when we expanded those sidewalks? I don't understand the measurement before that project happened, by the cemetery, like where we've expanded. How did we measure what was happening before and how are we measuring what happened? As an example,
Speed.
speed
yeah.
of the cars? So by expanding the sidewalks?
We narrowed the road, which
Mhm.
is one of the concepts behind traffic calming, which is traffic calming is nothing more than making people feel uncomfortable doing something you don't want them to do.
Yeah.
That's really what it's about.
But it wasn't also like safety of people walking on the street versus now having a sidewalk,
I don't know how you would measure that.
Right. That's my point. Like, I just wonder if everything has a measurability.
Well, I think that's why you try to come up with maybe multiple ways to measure for each one, because one might work there, the other might not.
Mhm.
Did we go out and see how many people were walking across the street to go to the east side where there was a narrow sidewalk? No.
Right,
Did we count how many people were walking in the street? No.
right.
But a lot of the impetus behind that one specific was speed on 8th Street. And that's the data we collected.
Mhm.
Thoughts? Anybody else? Yeah, Nikki. Nikki, maybe you should come up to the microphone so we can hear you better.
So I was just thinking back, thinking along the lines of complete streets and 8th Street. Had we looked at, is it on now? So I was thinking about 8th Street because we were pretty involved then. If we had had a complete streets with the thought in our mind about measurement, then we would have thought about the fact, I'm only thinking in hindsight, how many kids on Strider bikes, how many people use the west side now as a multimodal corridor where we didn't even have that before. So if we looked at measurements, we would say, all these kids from these preschools are going down this other route where I would see them go down. And now they're taking the kids down 8th Street, and it's a very active sidewalk. So if we had, and measurement is one of the guiding principles of complete streets. So if we had that in the beginning, we would be thinking about that and taking some measurement in the beginning. And I think what the complete street says, in order to engage your community in understanding the progress, is that then you could report it back to the community. This is what it was like before. This is what it's like now. This is what we've accomplished. Rah, rah, BPT. It's like not just sitting and talking. So, one of the things
I won't belabor this because I know you have a lot of things, but one of the things that I would like to see in FHU, because they do mention complete streets, is to put those 10 guiding principles right alongside it. So when the trustees look at it, they know at least in a broad vision what we're talking about in terms of complete streets.
Yes.
Good idea. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think we would do that. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think you point out that sometimes you got to look a little deeper for what you're trying to measure, right? Right.
So do we even know, there was one thing that was brought up, I liked what, Ted had brought up at the last meeting, the whole thing, let's bring complete streets into the, beginning sections. I don't know if we've seen anything. Has that been done? Have we seen anything that would say, oh, okay, we're,
Well,
check.
he said he was going to add it.
Okay, so
the
it's not
final-
like we've
The final
seen
thing we
anything.
haven't
Okay.
seen yet, yeah.
Okay.
Well, who said they were gonna, did,
Matthew.
yeah,
said-
I think it's in, creating a complete streets policy is in the action items that FHU,
Well, that's what I alluded to. He had that one sentence that said,
right,
complete a
Right,
clear,
right,
complete
right.
streets policy, but the whole point was, from my perspective, was it's a big enough deal that it needs to be emphasized up front in the introduction of the document, that this is the, what we're basing all of this 65 pages on of, that it's all related to this complete streets thing that the town has to buy off on. I mean, right, having a beautiful document doesn't mean anything if the trustees don't buy off on it, but they have to be committed. And that's what the whole point is, of emphasizing the importance of complete streets up front so that they are committed to it. And that's all it says. Yeah. And
He
said he
did
would-
say at that meeting, he would beef that up
Yeah, he
and
said
bring
he
it
would
up
beef
into
that-
the
beef that up,
introduction.
yeah.
yeah, yeah, and this gets a little bit into the dilemma we face of,
He wasn't going to write the document, but to emphasize the importance of it in the beginning of the
right,
document.
well, I think this is the little bit of dilemma we face, which is what's an objective and what's an action item, right? I mean, a lot of things can fit under safety, but unless they're in the document somewhere, nobody set eyes on them, and you can't turn back to the document and say, this was sort of thought about and this was approved. So,
My thought is related to, for instance, the safety item number one. You spent a whole page basically talking about traffic calming and reducing speed and monitoring speed limit and reducing speed limit. And how many times can you say the same thing over? And over?
like I said, a lot of this was just a mind dump that we did, and a lot of it's redundant. So, clearly that part needs to be cleaned up. But you got to go through here and figure out which of these should be elevated to objectives and which should be action items. And there's not always a bright line between those two things. So, I think we got to put some thought into that as we go through this list.
Well, at the end, you refer to reevaluating the access plan. The what is it called?
133.
Yeah, the 133 access plan. I mean, and the need to review that hasn't, by the virtue of the fact that this whole document has been, in virtue of the fact of the AFC study on 133, hasn't that been addressed basically? Do you need to even talk
I haven't
about
seen
it
any,
here?
I haven't seen any indication of that. I mean, I haven't seen any indication of the town picking up the task of going to CDOT and saying, we think we need to rethink the access control plan. And as a matter of fact, I've seen just the opposite, right? I've seen the town accepting a 13-year-old document, even though the world has changed, and dropping it a crosswalk on top of that. So the difficulty is having something in the document, having it in the right place with the right emphasis and the right wording, so it's clearly understood by the trustees and everybody what is intended, right?
And one question, in terms of these goals that Rick put together, a little bit different, but when you look at it, it's also kind of like, wow. Is there any word that kind of talks about this, that once again, it's kind of setting a high bar, position Carbondale as a model community in its approach to transportation infrastructure? It's like, wow, that would be kind of, a great, in other words, to not have these sort of high visions somewhere in there would be kind of a shame to not have them somewhere. I don't know if they'd fit under any of these objectives, but once again, I love this idea of just adding something that just elevates the vision above what's been done. And I think they could understand that, once again, as Chris said, if we kind of put it to them somewhat simplistically and almost hold their hand for how this fits in, because it is really hard. I mean, we've talked many times about things and maybe there's a disconnect or something, but I mean, I'm, hearing Andy, I was kind of agreeing that if you just give them something, you have no idea what's.
Well, I mean, we also have Kevin who's listening and digesting and interpreting what we're doing, I think helps, but I do think that if you're successful in creating a list of objectives and a list of action items, however they're formatted, that can be tied to those objectives, the two of them can be pulled together as you take the document as a whole. Do you agree with that? Yeah, I mean,
sure. Yeah.
I mean,
So what's our deadline?
What's that?
What's our deadline for FHU?
well, I think a lot of the stuff is here. I mean, we're not going to get into, and what this does is it probably expands the action item list and puts a burden of priority on us where it sits anyway. But I think the two will be taken together, right? Your objectives and your action items need to be taken hand in hand. I mean, if you put an objective out there, there should be action items that talk about how you might accomplish that. And so back to what Rick said, if we break these two things out, objectives we want added, action items we wanted added, maybe drop it in some kind of icon or something that ties the two together, that might be the most expeditious way to get it done.
I think if you can break it down into, these are the objectives that aren't in there that we'd like to see in there, and these are some action items that we don't see in here that we'd like to see in here, I think you'll get something that, I may not say that everybody's jumping up and down about, but something that's acceptable and understandable.
Right.
And I do think you have the vast majority of the information here. It's just making it clear to both staff and FHU, which do you think are specific objectives and which do you think are action items? Because that's, I'll be honest, I haven't read through the whole thing.
No, that's, yeah.
But that's what I did see was like,
and I think
the numbering and lettering system looked like the numbers were more objectives and the letters were either measurements or.
Yeah, that's kind of where this was laid out. And I think, we'll work on it and figure out how as a team to work on it and get you some comments. I think it's very important, I think if we agree on one thing, it's very important to take a set of action items and take a set of capital project improvements and tie them to something so we all know why they're being done. What we're trying to accomplish. If we did everything on that list, you should be able to pick up the list and say, I know why this one's on here. I know what I'm tying to. I know, and I think that's something that's important to bring clarity to the report, but bringing clarity to the ongoing execution of this report is what I think we're after.
And to answer your question, the sooner the better,
Right.
hopefully by the end of this week.
End of the week, okay.
Yeah.
Or maybe Monday, if that would be.
Well, listen,
Well,
I think all of these things are on this list because they've been discussed by this group, and it was a list put together by this group. And so I don't think it will be difficult to maybe split those things out. Anybody else have any questions, thoughts?
Do we need to take any action on complete streets?
No, I don't think so. I think we need to figure out how it's identified in the report. One of the things that occurred to me when I was sort of making this is that the report itself could pick out a few of these things and discuss in more detail why they're important to focus on. Like why complete streets, or why complete streets, why safe routes to schools. Some of those things are just sort of less as bullet points, and they're not really flushed out as to why they are so important. And I think that's one of the things I'm struggling with, is to how to elevate some of these concepts to more than just things you check off a list, but to emphasize their importance in the context of a transit plan. But maybe that'll come out as we reformat this list a little bit.
I think there'd be some value to going through the exercise at least of copy pasting the AARP thing and make that into your own document, and replace the verbiage with Carbondale and see what that looks like maybe. And then that at least gives you something to bat around a little bit. I think it would be great ideally to have that thing on the heels closely of the plan.
With the plan.
So I think it would be good to get the ball rolling on your side of, like, this is the shape of that a little bit. But
When I was looking at complete streets, my thought was, well, if we accomplished everything that we're trying to accomplish with MAP, it would be a complete, we could check off everything was on complete streets as having been, at least set up or set in motion. So complete streets to me becomes a guide to make sure that we kind of stay on track and complete the MAP plan and follow through with long-term, assessments and measurements and setting up a system for this organization, for Bike Ped to be, provide an annual assessment, those kinds of things. But it seemed like if we had the perfect MAP plan, we would have accomplished what complete streets is trying to accomplish, right?
I think we would. Yeah, I think this hits on some of the points of complete streets, but since it's more of a list of things to do without any real guiding objectives, I think it falls short of being a real plan. And I think it also misses on the implementation aspect of a complete streets plan. So
can we make sure to, and I once again, I really like that idea of building in the 10 elements into MAP. Can we make it a point to ask them to do that as well?
sorry, you do what, Dave?
The 10 elements of complete streets, if we can ask them to just list the 10 as part of, this document.
Well, this is kind of what I was thinking about. There's certain things that are objectives or that are now listed as action items in FHU's report that, as Ted was saying, are important enough that could be elevated to warrant, a paragraph or two as to why we want to do that, right? So stating that we should have a complete streets plan doesn't just become an objective. You clearly stated why it's an objective, or why we're going to go after safe routes to schools. There could be sort of this middle ground of things that are both objectives and action items, but are important to what this community wants to accomplish, that they should almost be peeled out and highlighted somehow. Such as, complete streets, and that's where you might pull in those 10 points.
Yeah, and the only reason I was mentioning it is, it's very, very brief, bullet oriented, and you could just, it's reiterating things, but it makes it kind of a quickie thing of like, oh, right. Prioritizes, underinvested in communities. It measures, a little bit about proactive land use, measures progress. I mean, it's almost like a little bit of a checklist, but it just is another brief way of kind of showing a little bit of, and also a lot of people won't even know what complete streets is. I mean, I certainly did.
I think that's fair to define a little bit. And, one of the things as this conversation continues, I'm worried about is that as the document sits right now, you have a set of action items and you have a set of capital improvement projects. And I'm not sure, whether we should be doing all of those, whether we should be doing some of them or none of them. I mean, I know the answer is not none, but there's no way to sort of prioritize them. So, if we had that report now and we got together at the next meeting and said, we're going to prioritize safe routes to schools, and the Board of Trustees go, why are you doing that? Right? There needs to be something in here that drives priorities a little bit. And so we're not just floundering, and if you're going to put a bulb out somewhere, you understand why you did it and what you wanted, what you wanted to accomplish. And I don't see that in both the action items or the capital improvements project.
I think, so, I don't know, it's likely that it's too late at this point to add this, but I think I mentioned this at a meeting a couple months ago that like if I were starting this project now, I would like to see sort of like a vision of different parts of town. It could be like the downtown core or Main Street, or like a street or a route or an area, and with the idea of like what we want that to be like in terms of the transportation there. And I think if it had something, I don't know, even if there was like even a basic version of that, I think it could help understand something like, why are we putting a bulb out here? It's like, because we are trying to make the street or this area a certain way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that, gets to Rick's point about Main Street, and that would be an objective, right? That might help guide some of our actions, right? Rick, were you going to lean in there?
I was just going to say, I think once we add missing objectives, it'll start to be some clarity. I mean, I think just some objectives that are missing, so we're a little lost. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if we complete our list of objectives that we feel are important, then we'll be able to relate the actions
Yes.
and the projects back to those objectives. So I think we just, we've got.
Just work with what we got.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to add that one, Andy. I know you said it before, and I liked it when you said it before. Okay. Is that a wrap? Oh, yes, Nikki.
Just a couple of things from AFC that they asked me to bring up at this meeting. So one, in terms of this model legislation, we're willing to work on, and maybe one or two people from the board want to work with us in creating just what a document would look like. Not saying to the trustees, here, approve it, this is a resolution, but to say, this is what a complete street resolution looks like. And it's got a lot of the things like, why do this? Well, it tells you how to embed, this is because of safety, because of 10 criteria that they give for safety. So we're willing to work on that and to create like a sample just for the trustees to take a look at, and would be really grateful for people from the board if like 2 or 3 people who just want to get together and try and put this together, then we could figure out how to do that. And then the trustees would have a sense of what it is that we're looking at to move the whole project forward.
Mhm.
So I want to propose that. And then where's the other things that they asked me? Okay, so, yeah, to create the subgroup to make the model proposal. And then originally, the other Matt, said that he was going to include the AFC 133 report along with it, so it's taken as a packet. I don't know if that's still part of what they're doing. We were sort of left in the, not understanding how the two were going to interface with one another. And I think those were the.
Hey, Nikki, were you looking to
things.
see I think the AFC document should be included somehow, not just referenced. Maybe add that as an addendum to the map or something would be a recommendation.
Okay, however you want to do that, we just
Right.
didn't want it to get lost because some of the things that we talk about really don't look only at 133, but look at the roadways that go to the 133 intersection, which is what the Complete Streets kind of says. Okay, now that you're at, how are you going to get to this intersection? Or how the places where the town doesn't need CDOT's permission to make like a crosswalk because it's on Village Road to cross from one side to the other now that we have 4 trails going there. So there were a couple of things on there that we don't need CDOT's approval. So,
Okay.
okay, so if there's anybody, I don't know if you're in agreement about doing a model
Listen,
legislation.
I think we should have a legislation and we should have a complete streets policy. I'm reluctant to ask anybody to put a lot of time into it until we see if it's one, included in FHU's recommendations, and 2, whether or not the trustees would contemplate it. It's work, and we've all put a lot of work in this thing, and just feeling a little reluctant to.
We'll, if you are all burned out, can understand that. And most of us, I think all of us, don't have other jobs that we're doing. It's like this has become, 130 has become like, okay, let's be finished with that so we could go on and do something else. But I think we're willing to take it on.
We'll talk.
If Chris is saying that he thinks that would help the trustees to understand it, we'll create a sample.
Okay, we'll connect on that and see if we can partner up with you guys.
Okay.
I'd be willing to help you, Nikki,
Okay.
if you want to make a note, if we get to that.
Yeah, well, yeah. Listen, far be it from me to tell people how to spend their time. And I think it would be, I think it would be helpful for the trustees to see something. It'd help them make a decision on it, right? The only other thing I want to bring up is that, in this, a lot of the capital improvement projects seem to come without having done the action items, right? It's to me, we've developed a list of action items that or project lists that are unclear why we're doing those in some cases, and how they tie back to specific objectives. And I feel like we got to go through the pilot programs. We've got to go through the speed studies. We've got to go through certain steps of action items before we can have a real clear understanding of capital improvements. And I'm wondering how the commission feels about that. Because, you could come out of this having a capital improvement list that then starts getting budgeted, right? It's like, oh, we got 20 items, we have 14 bulb outs to do, let's go do it. And, in the meantime, we're trying to catch up doing the work that would inform what capital improvements we do. And that's a problem I have. I don't know. And based on that, I'd recommend that, the capital improvement list be considered, capital improvements to be considered as we complete, the action items. I don't know if anybody else shares that concern.
Are you referring to like the roundabout and like the connection to 8th Street, like those?
I'm referring to the sidewalk connections, the bulb outs, the curb radii, the list of, I don't know how many capital improvement projects there were. And again, the problem with tackling this is you can't look at any of those and say, these are bad ideas, right? But I have no idea whether that's the best place to put the money, the time and the effort if you want to calm traffic and you haven't even done the pilot programs yet. So I think those capital items need to take a back seat to the action items. And I just wonder how you guys feel about that.
Is that something that becomes part of an implementation plan that we have to factor in what needs, this item has to happen before this item happens. This plan has to be fully flushed out before we can do this project. But I mean, I'm not sure we can address all those issues in one master plan. We have to have the ability to, on an annual basis or, at some periodic basis, decide what list of things we want to tackle and what that means in terms of priorities and what objectives we're going to meet, and then we plan for.
I think so, but as it sits right now, they're in a plan by the consultant hired by the town, and he came up with a list of projects. And I think the trustees in the town might start chasing those projects.
Right. I mean,
And if we're okay with that, I mean, I'm not okay with it, but.
But didn't that already happen? Hasn't that already happened? Like that budget and that list, like way before we started talking about all this?
Which list?
Well,
The
only to the extent of
capital,
133. It's only 133 is the only thing.
No, one-
And there's only a couple of intersections that they're talking about jumping on right away because they were seen as critical places that needed to be done, acted upon. I think that's the only reason they jumped on those. But looking at the way the town of Berthold did it, they made multiple maps. Every map had on it what the changes were. And then they made a calendar for this year. We're going to do this project, and this project. For the next year, we're going to do this project, and this project. And they broke it down year by year, and realizing that it takes, according to, I think it was the safe routes document that I read, Colorado Safe Routes to School, knowing that it takes a year and a half to 2 years to get the funding approved, and then another year to 2 years after that to get the project completed, you're looking at 3 or 4 years of working on things, out over, a number of years, but having the projects mapped so that you can see in this neighborhood, and therefore everything on this street, on this neighborhood is going to be done with this style of change, and everything on this intersecting street is going to be done with this such style of change. And whether they all are the same or not, you can look at them and see, but you're not just looking at a random list of 75 projects randomly trying to figure out how to prioritize them. You're looking at them neighborhood by neighborhood.
But that's a choice of priority. And that goes back to my first comment about what is our priority? Is it to prevent someone getting killed crossing 133?
Yeah.
Is it
that's why
to
they jumped on
beautify a street? Is
133.
it to make it more fun for the bicycle
Yeah.
people in our town? It goes, I feel like every discussion we've had tonight goes back to us committing to priority. And how are we grouping this whole big mess?
We're doing it by looking at a random list of 75 items that are all jumbled up. We don't have them organized by street, by neighborhood, by whatever.
Yeah, or
criteria.
objective. And I think you're right. I have trouble looking at that capital improvement list and figure out how to prioritize them, not just A through Z based on what's there, but what's not there, right? There are things that maybe we should be doing that our work will identify that's not even on that list.
We don't even have a really well thought out, checked off priority corridors.
Right.
I mean, like, so there are some things that obviously, need to be done before we start.
Yeah. And given that there's only so much time and so much money and so much capacity to do the work, I want to make sure that, if we're going to spend time working on a multimodal corridors and coming up with recommendations for those that, and we think those are a priority over, bulb out somewhere, that we have an opportunity to express that and have that put in. So I guess what I would propose is that this commission, in addition to these other comments that we're going to offer up, we also offer up that because of this work that needs to be done to inform the capital and project, that the capital and project list somehow get designated to projects to consider or to be altered as, we do the work to inform the projects. So some wording like that, I'd like to offer up to FHU if you guys are in agreement with that.
Can I just add a couple things and I'll try to make them quick? Just bringing this back to where we started. It was a very high priority of the Board of Trustees that this process come up with a list of projects that they could start working on. Second, these aren't just random things that Matthew came up with. They're based on hundreds of comments from the community and what the community thought was important to them as well. So just.
Well, I understand both of those comments. Asking for a project list is wanting projects to come out and work on. Doesn't mean just give me a project. It means give me a well thought out list of projects.
And the projects were thought out by the
Yeah,
community.
and I just never haven't seen that, right? I mean, I looked through all the comments
in there that describes where a lot of these projects tie into.
Yeah, Kevin, but if you look through that complete list of comments from the survey, and we've already talked about how the survey missed a lot of people because of how it was done and how it was conducted. The survey, we never saw any data from the survey except a list of comments. I looked at all those. I tried to find some unifying principles in that survey, the survey comments. All I found was unification around 133. And, when I asked Matthew about this, he said, we use a survey, but I also used my judgment as a planner. And I don't think Matt spent, any time in this town looking at any of that infrastructure. So I walk away thinking that the thoughts and the guidance that created that project list was not what it should have been. And it gave us a poor list.
And I would argue you had the same opinion when we did the 8th Street project and didn't listen to what the community said. And we ended up having to go to the trustees for a compromise solution. And I didn't mean you individually. I just meant
what that comment means. I mean,
your recommendation was to eliminate the parking on 8th Street, even though the community came and said, we can't eliminate all the parking.
I don't think our job was to do what the community said. That's a trustee's job. Our job was to make a recommendation to meet the objectives that were laid out by that street. So I don't see any inconsistency there. And, listen, FHU and the trustees will do what they will. This is a concern that I think is legitimate and that we're gonna mention it. I don't know how you can, recommend that you do, the objective is to calm traffic throughout town, and you recommend that you do pilot programs, but you also have a bunch of work items that may have nothing to do with the outcomes of that project. So it's baffles me. Anybody else have questions or?
I have one comment that may make us, help us feel potentially like we're doing something without actually having to make a physical change in terms of comfort and safety. And that is one of the things that I came across reading about safe routes to school is there's a lot of money apparently available for training and hiring school crossing guards. And if we were to, we may not accomplish anything within this next year, but potentially we might be able to submit a grant application just to cover training and hiring some school crossing guards at critical places along 133 where we think it's a dangerous area. And until we get crosswalks built and that kind of thing, that might be something that might increase the community safety and sense of safety.
Yeah, I think those are, so there's a lot of ideas out there. We could take those up as we move through the final stages of, I think we just got to move through the final stages of MAP and then we can get into detail like that. Okay, thanks everybody. Meeting's adjourned.